My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my Valentino suit jacket, watching through the restaurant's glass doors as James pulled up in his BMW, his arm casually draped around Veronica's shoulder. The woman he'd introduced as his executive assistant 3 years ago was now openly wearing the diamond bracelet I'd found in his desk drawer last month. The one he'd claimed was for our anniversary. I took a steadying breath, feeling the reassuring presence of Elena Bradford, Chairwoman of Luminary Tech's board of directors, beside me. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Olivia?" she whispered. I simply nodded, remembering how James had laughed in my face at our 5th anniversary dinner when I'd mentioned my dreams of leading a tech company. "The restaurant business is more your speed, sweetheart," he'd said, clinking glasses with Veronica. "Leave the serious business to the professionals." As they walked toward the entrance, completely unaware that I'd reserved the entire West Wing, I caught James's eye through the glass. The flash of recognition, followed by naked panic as he spotted the Luminary Tech executive board seated behind me, was worth every second of the pain I'd endured. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp autumn evening carried the scent of fallen leaves and possibility as I stood in the reception area of Castellini's, the 5-star restaurant where James and I had celebrated every anniversary during our 7-year marriage. The maitre d' gave me a knowing nod. Marco had been surprisingly eager to help arrange tonight's special event after I'd explained the situation. Perhaps the generous booking fee for the entire West Wing had helped. Or maybe it was the fact that James had always treated the staff with the same condescension he'd eventually turned on me. "Ms. Harrington, the other guests have arrived," my assistant Zoe whispered, gesturing toward the private entrance where 7 impeccably dressed executives were being escorted to our reserved section. Each board member of Luminary Technologies had cleared their schedule for tonight's emergency acquisition meeting, though only Elena knew the full story. As far as the others were concerned, we were meeting a potential acquisition target whose struggling business needed our immediate decision. I smoothed the lapel of my crimson power suit, a far cry from the demure dresses James had always insisted I wear to look appropriate as his wife. My Yale MBA and decade of experience in tech innovation had been reduced to cute hobbies during our marriage, with James constantly reminding me that I should be grateful for the freedom to pursue my little interests while he handled the real work as VP of Operations at Meridian Software. Through the restaurant's tinted windows, I watched as James helped Veronica out of his car, his hand lingering at the small of her back. He was wearing the Rolex I'd given him for his birthday, which seemed fitting. James had always been comfortable, taking what I offered while giving nothing in return. Veronica tossed her perfectly highlighted hair, laughing at something he said. She'd been his executive assistant when we first met, and apparently much more than that for the past 3 years of our marriage. "The table is ready, Ms. Harrington," Marco announced, gesturing toward the lavish private dining room where crystal glasses caught the light from imported Italian chandeliers. The board members were already seated, reviewing the documents I'd provided earlier. Complete financial records of Meridian Software's steady decline since James had taken over operations, alongside my proposal for how Luminary could transform their outdated business model. "Everything looks exactly as you requested," Elena said, joining me at the entrance. "Though I'm still not clear on why this meeting needed to happen here, of all places." I met her questioning gaze with a small smile. "Sometimes, Elena, the right setting makes all the difference in business negotiations. Trust me, this venue will prove particularly motivating for our potential partners." The weight of the sealed envelope in my jacket pocket reminded me of the other documents I'd brought. The divorce papers my lawyer had finalized yesterday, citing irreconcilable differences in James's infidelity, complete with the private investigators, photographs I'd commissioned after finding that diamond bracelet. Tonight would mark both an ending and a beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from the hostess at the front. "They've arrived and are asking for their usual table. proceeding as planned. I took my position at the head of the long table, with the board members arranged on either side. Through the partially open door, I could see the main dining room where Marco was now leading James and Veronica toward their anniversary table, the same one where exactly 1 year ago I had arrived early to surprise James with news about my tech startup's first major investment, only to find him already there with Veronica, his hand casually resting on her thigh beneath the table. "I think you should order the salmon, babe," I heard James say as they approached, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone he used when telling me what to do. "The steak might be too heavy for you." Veronica giggled in response. "Whatever you think is best, Jamie. You know I trust your judgment completely." I felt a momentary wave of nausea, hearing the pet name I'd once used for him. The same night I'd discovered them together, James had returned home hours later, dismissing my tear-stained questions with practiced ease. "Don't be ridiculous, Liv. Veronica is my assistant. We were discussing the Davidson account. Your imagination has always been overactive. It's why you're better suited to your little projects than the corporate world." That night had changed everything, though not in the way James had expected. Instead of crumbling, I'd channeled my hurt into determination, accelerating my tech company's development while carefully tracking Meridian's increasing vulnerabilities under James's mismanagement. I'd moved into the guest bedroom, citing insomnia, and spent those nights building Luminary technologies into exactly what Meridian needed to survive, and what James had never believed I could create. "Ms. Harrington, should we begin the presentation?" asked Victor Chen, our CFO, drawing me back to the present. "Not quite yet," I replied, my eyes fixed on the main dining room. "Our guests will be joining us momentarily." On cue, Marco appeared, at James's table, leaning down to speak quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read James's expression as it transformed from annoyance to confusion to shock. Marco gestured toward our private room, and James's head snapped up, his eyes searching until they locked with mine through the doorway. The blood drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. In that moment, watching recognition dawn in his eyes, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't about revenge, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing James's carefully constructed world crumble. This was about reclaiming my worth, about showing him and myself that his dismissal of my abilities had been his greatest mistake. "James," I called, my voice steady and professional. "How fortunate. The board and I were just about to discuss the potential acquisition of Meridian Software. Since you're the VP of Operations, your input would be invaluable." He stood frozen, one hand still on Veronica's shoulder, looking from me to the assembled board members with growing horror. Veronica's confusion was evident as she glanced between us, clearly trying to process why her lover's wife was hosting a business meeting at their anniversary restaurant. "Olivia?" James finally managed, his voice strangled. "What is this?" "Business," I replied simply. "Something you always said I didn't understand. Won't you join us? Ms. Reynolds is welcome too, of course. I believe the board would benefit from hearing multiple perspectives from Meridian's leadership." Elena gave me a sharp look, finally understanding the dual purpose of tonight's meeting. To her credit, she recovered quickly, her professional mask sliding back into place as she stood and extended her hand. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Elena Bradford, Chairwoman of Luminary Technologies. We've been reviewing your company's market position and financial projections. I must say, we have some concerns about Meridian's current trajectory that Ms. Harrington, your CEO, has been kind enough to address in her proposal." James's eyes widened further. "CEO? Olivia's the CEO of Luminary? Since when?" "Since founding the company 3 years ago," I replied, watching his face carefully. "Around the same time you began telling me my business ideas were childish fantasies, I believe." The color that had drained from his face now rushed back as anger and embarrassment warred in his expression. Veronica tugged at his sleeve, whispering something urgently in his ear. "We should continue this discussion privately," he finally said, his jaw tight. "Veronica, wait in the car." "Actually," I interjected, "as this involves both your professional and personal conduct, I think Ms. Reynolds should stay. After all, as your executive assistant, she's been privy to many of Meridian's internal operations." The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone. Victor Chen cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Elena's lips twitched with barely suppressed amusement. "This is inappropriate." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Olivia," James hissed, stepping closer while Veronica hung back, looking increasingly uncomfortable in her tight black dress, eerily similar to the one I'd worn to our anniversary dinner last year. "Inappropriate?" I raised an eyebrow. "Like bringing your lover to our anniversary dinner? Or perhaps like telling your wife her business acumen is a cute hobby, while your own company loses market share quarter after quarter?" The restaurant had grown impossibly quiet, with even the kitchen staff pausing to witness the unfolding drama. Marco discreetly closed the door to the main dining room, ensuring the other patrons wouldn't be disturbed, while leaving our private section visible to James and Veronica. "You know nothing about running Meridian," James sputtered, his confident facade cracking. "You're a hobbyist who got lucky with some app investors." I smiled, opening the leather portfolio in front of me. "Perhaps we should review Meridian's quarterly earnings. Or maybe discuss how your refusal to update your security protocols has left your client data vulnerable to breaches. The very issues I highlighted in my proposal to you 3 years ago, the one you used as a coaster at our dinner table." His face paled again as the board members shifted in their seats, several pulling out notepads. This wasn't how acquisition meetings typically proceeded, but none of them seemed eager to interrupt. "You can't do this," James said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "This is my company, my career." "Correction," I replied, sliding a document across the table. "This was your opportunity. Now it's Luminary's. We're prepared to acquire Meridian software at a significantly reduced valuation, given the operational issues and market position decline under your leadership." James stared at the acquisition proposal, the same horrified recognition in his eyes that I'd seen the night I discovered him with Veronica. He was finally seeing me, not as his supportive wife or the woman whose ambitions he'd dismissed, but as the business leader I'd always been. "This is personal," he accused, looking up with narrowed eyes. "No, James, this is business," I countered, echoing the words he'd used countless times to justify late nights at the office and missed anniversaries. The fact that it's happening on what would have been our 8th anniversary, at the same restaurant, where you brought your mistress last year, is merely efficient scheduling. Veronica stepped forward then, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't know you were still married. He told me you were separated." I turned to her, feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy. "We weren't then, though." "We certainly are now." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the sealed envelope. In fact, these divorce papers should clarify our current status perfectly. James's eyes darted wildly around the room, looking for an escape, a reprieve, or perhaps just a friendly face. He found none. The board members watched with professional detachment, witnessing not just a marital confrontation, but a business negotiation years in the making. "You need me?" he finally said, desperation giving way to arrogance once more. "Meridian's clients trust me. They won't stay if I'm pushed out." Elena Bradford chose that moment to intervene, her voice cool and composed. "Actually, Mr. Harrington, our market research suggests otherwise. Client satisfaction under your leadership has dropped 37% in the past 2 years. The primary complaint? Outdated security protocols and resistance to digital transformation. Exactly the issues Ms. Harrington's acquisition plan addresses." James's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. The confident businessman who had patronized me for years was crumbling before my eyes. "Why don't you both join us?" I suggested, gesturing to the two empty chairs at the far end of the table, a deliberate reversal of how James had always positioned me at family gatherings, far from where important conversations happened. "We have much to discuss about Meridian's future, and the role you may or may not play in it." My phone buzzed again, another text from Zoe. "The team from Davidson Corp just arrived for the surprise announcement. Should I send them in?" I smiled, remembering how James had used the Davidson account as his excuse for being with Veronica that night. What he didn't know was that Davidson had been dissatisfied with Meridian for months and had secretly reached out to Luminary for alternatives. Tonight, they would announce their decision to transfer their business, the final blow to James's professional ego. "Is something amusing about this situation?" James demanded, his voice rising as his control slipped further. "Not amusing." "James, illuminating," I replied. "A year ago at this very restaurant, you told me I'd never understand real business. You said my ideas about digital transformation and client-centered security protocols were naive fantasies. Tonight, those same ideas have built Luminary into the company that will either save Meridian or watch it collapse under your leadership." I stood, smoothing my crimson suit, and addressed the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe our additional guests have arrived. Shall we welcome the Davidson Corporation representatives and begin the formal proceedings?" James's face contorted as the pieces finally clicked into place. "Davidson? They're here? They're your clients now?" "Not yet," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "But after tonight's presentation, I believe they will be. The only question remaining is whether they'll be working with Luminary alone or with Luminary's newest acquisition, a reformed Meridian software." The door opened as Marco ushered in the Davidson executives, their expressions curious but eager. I extended my hand to greet them, feeling James's stare burning into my back. "Welcome to what I believe will be a transformative evening for all our companies," I began, my voice strong and clear. "Before we start, I should introduce everyone. I'm Olivia Harrington, CEO of Luminary Technologies, and that," I said, gesturing toward James, "is my soon-to-be ex-husband, who once told me I'd never succeed in tech. Life, it seems, has a remarkable sense of irony. Creating content like this takes time and dedication, so if you're enjoying this story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Tomorrow, I'll share what happened when James realized the full extent of my business strategy, and how I'd been planning this moment since the night he shattered our marriage." The Davidson executives exchanged surprised glances at my introduction, their professional composure momentarily slipping. Richard Davidson, the silver-haired founder of the company, recovered first with a knowing smile. "Ms. Harrington, I had no idea this meeting would be quite so illuminating." James stood frozen near the doorway, his hand still hovering protectively near Veronica's elbow. The confident businessman who had spent years dismissing my ideas had been replaced by someone who looked trapped and desperate. "This is completely unprofessional," he finally managed, directing his words to Richard Davidson rather than to me. "Olivia is using a business meeting to address personal grievances." Richard Davidson raised an eyebrow. "On the contrary, Mr. Harrington, in my experience, how someone conducts their personal affairs often reflects how they handle their professional ones. Trust, transparency, respect. These values don't stop at the office door." He turned to me with newfound appreciation. "Please continue, Ms. Harrington. I'm particularly interested in your security protocol overhaul." I gestured for everyone to take their seats, noting how James hesitated before reluctantly guiding Veronica to the two chairs at the far end of the table. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that even the restaurant staff seemed to sense it, directing their attentive service primarily toward me and the board members rather than to James, who had always demanded deferential treatment during our anniversary dinners. As you're all aware, I began, activating the presentation screen built into the private dining room's wall. Digital security isn't just a technical issue. It's a fundamental business advantage in today's market. The approach I've developed at Luminary integrates client-centered security with transparent operations, allowing for both enhanced protection and greater user accessibility. The screen displayed side-by-side comparisons of Meridian's outdated security framework and Luminary's innovative approach. I could see the Davidson team leaning forward with interest while James shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "This looks remarkably similar to the proposal I shared with you 3 years ago, James," I noted, keeping my tone professional despite the personal history hanging heavy in the air. "The one you said was unnecessarily complicated and would never work in practice." Elena Bradford smoothly interjected, maintaining the business focus of the meeting. "The results speak for themselves. Since implementing Ms. Harrington's security framework, Luminary has experienced 0 breaches while reducing client access friction by 47%. James's face flushed dark red. "Meridian serves different clients with different needs," he countered, desperation edging into his voice. "Our more traditional approach has served us well for years." Richard Davidson cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Harrington, your traditional approach is precisely why we've been reconsidering our relationship with Meridian. Last quarter's data vulnerability nearly exposed our entire client database. Your team's response was less than reassuring." I fought to keep my expression neutral, though inside I felt a surge of validation. James had always treated me as though my understanding of technology was superficial at best. A woman's perspective that couldn't possibly grasp the complexities of real business challenges. Yet here was concrete evidence that my approach, the very one he had dismissed, was exactly what his most important clients had been seeking. "The acquisition proposal before you," I continued, directing my words to the Davidson team while being acutely aware of James's mounting discomfort, would allow us to immediately implement these security protocols across Meridian's existing client base, preventing future vulnerabilities while enhancing user experience. Victor Chen, Luminary's CFO, smoothly took over to discuss the financial specifics. As he detailed the valuation and terms, I watched James's expression shift from angry to calculating. He was finally seeing the full picture, not just that I had built a successful company, but that I had positioned it perfectly to either save or supplant his own. "These terms are predatory," James interrupted, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "You're undervaluing Meridian by at least—" "Sure, am I?" I asked, sliding another document across the table. A detailed analysis of Meridian's declining market position, including internal reports that James himself had buried. "These are your company's actual performance metrics, not the adjusted figures presented to your board. I believe they support our valuation quite accurately." James's eyes widened in shock. "How did you get these? These are confidential internal documents." "Marissa Daniels," I replied simply. "Your former chief financial officer who resigned last month after you ignored her warnings about Meridian's financial trajectory. She was quite concerned about potential shareholder liability." Veronica shifted uncomfortably beside James, her eyes darting between us. It was clear she was seeing a side of James, and of me, that had been carefully hidden behind his constructed narrative of a successful businessman and his supportive but naive wife. "Marissa had no right to share proprietary information," James sputtered, his legal training finally asserting itself. "She had every right as a whistleblower concerned about financial misrepresentation," Elena countered smoothly. "But that's a separate legal matter. Tonight, we're focused on a potential business solution that could benefit all parties, including Meridian's employees and clients who deserve better than they've been getting." The conversation continued with detailed discussions of integration, timelines, and management transitions. Throughout it all, I maintained my professional composure, though I couldn't help noticing the irony of the situation. 1 year ago in this very restaurant, James had spent our anniversary dinner telling me that my business ideas were unrealistic, while his hand rested on Veronica's thigh beneath the table. Now, those same ideas were the lifeline his company desperately needed. During a brief pause as the Davidson team reviewed the financial projections, James leaned across the table toward me, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk privately, Olivia. This isn't like you, using business to settle personal scores." I met his gaze evenly. "You never really knew me, James. You saw what you wanted to see. A supportive wife who would never challenge your sense of superiority. You didn't recognize my business acumen because you weren't looking for it." "That's not fair," he protested, glancing around to ensure the others were still occupied with their discussions. "I always supported your interests." "My interests?" I repeated, keeping my voice carefully controlled despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You mean the way you referred to my Stanford MBA as my expensive hobby? Or how you explained to your colleagues that my tech startup was keeping me busy while we decided about children?" A flash of recognition crossed his face. He had indeed said those exact words at a company dinner, not realizing I was within earshot. "I was trying to protect you," he claimed, falling back on his familiar pattern of justification. "The business world is cutthroat. I didn't want you to get hurt when your ideas didn't pan out." "No, James. You didn't want me to succeed where you might fail." I straightened the papers in front of me, signaling an end to our private exchange. "And as for using business to settle personal scores, I learned that strategy from watching you. How many careers did you derail because someone challenged your authority or, worse, proved you wrong?" Before he could respond, Richard Davidson reclaimed everyone's attention. "These projections are impressive, Ms. Harrington. If Luminary can achieve even 70% of these benchmarks after integrating Meridian's client base, we'd be very interested in expanding our relationship." "We can and we will," I assured him, grateful for the return to business matters. "In fact, I've taken the liberty of preparing a preliminary migration plan specifically for Davidson Corporation's needs." I revealed the custom proposal my team had developed after weeks of careful analysis of their systems. James stared at the detailed plan with undisguised shock. "You've been planning this for months," he realized aloud, all while pretending our marriage was just going through a rough patch. I felt the room's attention shift back to the personal drama unfolding alongside the business negotiation. "Our marriage ended the moment you brought another woman to our anniversary dinner, James," I said quietly. "I simply chose to focus my energy on building something meaningful rather than tearing you down. Though it appears you've managed to do both quite effectively," Elena observed, with the hint of a smile. The dinner proceeded with servers bringing course after course of exquisite food that went largely untouched at James and Veronica's end of the table. The business discussion evolved naturally into implementation details, with the Davidson team growing increasingly enthusiastic about the proposed changes. During the dessert course, Marco approached with a bottle of champagne, the same vintage James and I had shared during happier anniversaries. "Compliments of the house," he announced, deftly opening the bottle and filling glasses for everyone except James and Veronica, whom he pointedly overlooked. "A toast," proposed Richard Davidson, raising his glass, "to new partnerships and visionary leadership." As glasses clinked around the table, I caught James watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was it regret? Resentment? Perhaps a dawning realization of what he had lost. Not just a wife, but a business partner whose vision might have saved his company years ago if only he'd been willing to listen. "I think we've covered everything essential," I said as the evening drew to a close. "Unless anyone has further questions?" James cleared his throat. What happens to current Meridian leadership in this acquisition scenario? The question was pointed. He was asking about his own fate. Elena responded with practiced diplomacy. Leadership transitions are delicate, of course. We envision a period of consultation followed by strategic reassignment based on merit and expertise. Her emphasis on merit wasn't subtle. In other words, James translated bitterly, I'll be pushed out of the company my father built. Your father built a company focused on innovation and client satisfaction, I reminded him gently. Both have suffered under your leadership. But no, James, you won't necessarily be pushed out. You'll simply need to prove your value like everyone else without the protection of your name or title. The Davidson executives exchanged glances before Richard stood, signaling their department. We have much to discuss internally, but I believe we've seen everything we need to make our decision. He shook my hand firmly. Expect our call tomorrow. Ms. Harrington, tonight has been enlightening in more ways than one. After they departed, the board members gradually followed suit, each offering brief words of encouragement or admiration as they left. Elena was the last to go, pausing beside my chair. Remind me never to cross you, she murmured with a mixture of respect and amusement. Will you be all right finishing this conversation alone? I nodded, appreciating her concern. Some endings need to happen in private. Soon, only James, Veronica, and I remained in the private dining room, the remains of our business dinner scattered between us like the wreckage of my marriage. You can go, Veronica, James said quietly. I need to speak with my wife. Ex-wife, I corrected, pushing the divorce papers across the table. As soon as you sign these. Veronica hesitated, looking uncertain for the first time that evening. James? Should I wait in the car? He'll find his own way home, I assured her, my tone leaving no room for argument. Whatever remains to be said between us won't take long. After Veronica reluctantly departed, James and I sat in silence. For several moments, the weight of our shared history and divergent futures hanging between us. Was any of it real? He finally asked, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. Us, I mean. Or was I just a stepping stone in your career plan? The question stung with its irony. I loved you completely, James. I believed in our partnership, both, personal and professional. I brought my ideas to you first, remember? Before investors, before competitors. I wanted us to build something together. He winced, perhaps remembering the enthusiasm with which I'd shared my business proposals during our early years together and the increasing dismissiveness with which he'd treated them. When did you stop seeing me? I asked, the question escaping before I could reconsider. When did I become someone to manage rather than a partner to respect? James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our marriage. I never stopped loving you, Olivia, but somewhere along the way, I think I stopped seeing you clearly. Maybe I was intimidated by your potential. Maybe I needed to feel superior. I don't know. You chose Veronica? Because she reflects the image of yourself you want to see. Someone who admires you without challenging you. I gathered my papers, suddenly weary of the conversation. Tonight wasn't about humiliating you, James. It was about claiming the professional respect you never gave me. By taking my company, he countered, a flash of the old anger returning. By saving it, I corrected. Meridian is 3/4 away from bankruptcy under your leadership. The acquisition offer is more generous than you deserve, professionally speaking. Personally speaking. I trailed off, unsure how to quantify the emotional debt between us. James stared at the divorce papers, making no move to sign them. And if I refuse the acquisition, if I fight this, then Luminary will proceed without Meridian. We'll acquire your clients one by one as your company continues its decline. I stated the business reality without malice. The Davidson account is just the beginning. Your largest clients have already been expressing dissatisfaction with your outdated systems. His shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of him as the magnitude of his professional vulnerability sank in. You've thought of everything. I had to, I replied simply. You taught me that women in business can't afford to overlook details or leave vulnerabilities exposed. James finally reached for the divorce papers, scanning them briefly before looking up with surprise. These terms are extremely fair. You're not asking for alimony or even half of our joint assets. I don't need your money, James. My company's valuation exceeded Meridian's 3 months ago. I slid a pen across the table. I only want a clean break and professional respect. As he signed each page with deliberate strokes, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Not the vindication I might have expected, but something more nuanced. There was sadness for what might have been if he'd been able to see me as an equal. There was relief at finally closing this chapter of my life. And, yes, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that my business acumen, so long dismissed, had been irrefutably proven. There, he said, pushing the signed documents back across the table. It's done. Not quite, I replied, gathering the papers. There's still the matter of Meridian's future. The board will vote on the acquisition tomorrow. Your board members should receive our formal offer within the hour. James laughed hollowly. They'll accept it. They've been looking for an exit strategy since our last quarterly report. He stood, straightening his jacket in a gesture that seemed more habitual than purposeful. Will I still have a job when this is over? I considered him thoughtfully. Despite everything, James was a talented operations specialist when he wasn't blinded by pride or insecurity. That depends on whether you can adapt to a new reality, one where your ideas are evaluated on merit rather than your position in the hierarchy. Working for my ex-wife, you mean? Working with a CEO who recognizes talent and rewards innovation, I corrected. Your choice, James. He nodded slowly, reality settling over him. I'll need time to think. Take all the time you need. The business world won't wait, though. I stood as well, signaling the end of our conversation. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this, both professionally and personally. James paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression that mingled regret with something that might have been dawning respect. You know what the worst part is, Olivia? You were right about everything. The security protocols, the client-centered approach, all of it. If I'd listened to you 3 years ago, we might be celebrating a very different kind of anniversary tonight. With that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the private dining room where my personal and professional lives had collided so dramatically. I sank back into my chair, the emotional weight of the evening finally catching up with me. Marco appeared silently at my side, offering a fresh glass of champagne. To new beginnings, Ms. Harrington? He suggested with a knowing smile. I accepted the glass, allowing myself a moment to acknowledge the significance of what had just transpired. To seeing clearly, I amended, and being seen. As I sipped the champagne, my phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Board impressed. Davidson likely to sign. You've changed the game. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate? A wave of satisfaction washed over me, not because I had humiliated James or orchestrated his downfall, but because I had finally created a space where my vision could flourish unimpeded by his dismissal. The journey from that painful anniversary dinner a year ago to tonight's triumph hadn't been about revenge. It had been about refusing to let someone else's limitations define my potential. I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave, pausing, to thank Marco for his assistance in arranging the evening. It was my pleasure, Ms. Harrington, he assured me. Some dinners are more satisfying to serve than others. Outside in the cool evening air, I took a moment to appreciate how different my departure was from last year's anniversary, when I'd fled the restaurant in tears after discovering James with Veronica. Tonight, I walked out with my head high. Divorce papers signed, business acquisition in progress, and my future entirely my own to shape. My driver, Thomas, held the door of the waiting car. "Home, Ms. Harrington?" "Not yet," I decided. "Let's go to the office. There's still work to be done." The city lights blurred past the window as we drove toward Luminary's headquarters, a sleek modern building that stood in stark contrast to Meridian's traditional corporate offices. James had once mockingly referred to my architectural preferences as trying too hard to be innovative. Now that same innovative spirit was reshaping not just physical spaces but entire business models. At the office, a skeleton crew of dedicated team members was still working despite the late hour, preparing for tomorrow's formal acquisition announcement. They looked up in surprise as I entered, still dressed in my evening attire. "How did it go?" asked Zoe, hurrying to meet me with tablet in hand. "The Davidson team hasn't stopped talking about it since they left the restaurant. They've already sent preliminary approval for the contract migration." "It went exactly as planned," I confirmed, accepting the tablet and scanning the latest updates. "James signed the divorce papers. His board will receive our offer tonight, and Davidson is on board for the transition." Zoe shook her head in amazement. "When you first told me your strategy, confronting your cheating husband while simultaneously acquiring his company, I thought it was too personal, too risky. But you calculated everything perfectly." "Not everything," I admitted, thinking of the flash of genuine regret I'd seen in James's eyes. "The personal elements were more complicated than anticipated." My chief technology officer, Leo Park, approached with a tentative expression. "We've been discussing the integration plan for Meridian's systems. Their infrastructure is more outdated than we initially thought. The migration could be challenging." "But not impossible," I asserted, moving toward the conference room where digital displays showed detailed analysis of Meridian's technical architecture. "Let's review the critical paths. I want seamless transition for their clients, even if their backend is a mess." For the next 2 hours, we hammered out implementation plans, identified potential pitfalls, and developed contingency strategies. This was where I truly thrived, not in orchestrating personal confrontations, but in solving complex business challenges with innovative approaches. The very talent James had dismissed as a cute hobby was now reshaping the industry landscape. It was after midnight when I finally left the office, exhausted but satisfied. My driver had waited patiently, and as I settled into the car's back seat, I found myself reflecting on James's parting words. He was right. If he'd listened to my ideas years ago, our story might have unfolded very differently. But his dismissal, painful as it had been, had forced me to forge my own path and trust. My own vision without compromise. "Long day, Ms. Harrington?" Tomas asked as he navigated the nearly empty streets. "Long year?" I replied, watching the city slide past my window. "But worth every minute." My phone buzzed with an incoming email, the formal response from Meridian's board. They were requesting an emergency meeting at 7 a.m. to discuss the acquisition terms. Their message conveyed barely concealed desperation, confirming what I already knew. They had no viable alternatives. As we pulled up to my penthouse apartment, purchased after I moved out of the home James and I had shared, I felt a sense of completion. The anniversary that had once been a painful reminder of betrayal had been transformed into a landmark of professional triumph. I had reclaimed not just my dignity, but my rightful place in the business world James had tried to convince me I didn't belong in. My security guard greeted me as I entered the building. "Good evening, Ms. Harrington, or should I say good morning? There's a delivery for you upstairs." Curious, I took the elevator to my floor, wondering who would send something at this hour. Outside my door sat an elegant arrangement of white lilies, my favorite flowers, though not the ones James had always insisted on buying for our anniversaries, claiming roses were more appropriate. The card read simply, "To new beginnings. Your vision was always clear. I was the one who couldn't see. Congratulations on building something remarkable. J." I brought the flowers inside, placing them on my kitchen counter while I considered the gesture. Was it a genuine acknowledgement of my accomplishments, or a calculated attempt to soften my approach to the acquisition? With James, the personal and professional had always blurred in self-serving ways. Regardless of his intentions, tomorrow would proceed according to plan. Meridian would be acquired on Luminary's terms. Their clients would receive the upgraded services they deserved. And James would learn what it meant to be evaluated solely on his merits, rather than his position or connections. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Just heard from Richard Davidson. They're all in. Contract signed. Your strategy worked perfectly." I smiled, feeling a wave of professional satisfaction wash over me. This was what vindication truly felt like. Not seeing James humbled or his lover uncomfortable, but having my business vision validated by the very clients he had failed to serve properly. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, new challenges, new opportunities, and a new professional reality, where my former husband would either adapt to working under my leadership or fade into irrelevance. The choice, as I had told him, was entirely his. In the quiet of my bedroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. So different from the woman who had once carefully dressed for anniversary dinners according to James's preferences. Tonight, I had chosen my own path, my own clothing, my own business strategy. And for the first time in years, I felt completely, authentically myself. I sent a final email to my executive team confirming our 6 a.m. preparatory meeting before facing Meridian's board. Then I set my phone aside, ready to close this chapter and begin the next. 1 year ago, my husband had brought his lover to our anniversary dinner, never imagining that his betrayal would set in motion events that would transform not just our marriage, but an entire business ecosystem. Tonight, I had brought the company's board of directors to that same restaurant, creating a new anniversary to commemorate, not of a marriage, but of the moment I fully claimed my power and vision without apology. Some anniversaries mark endings, others celebrate new beginnings. The most powerful ones do both simultaneously. The morning arrived with the soft chime of my alarm at 5 a.m. I had slept surprisingly well considering the emotional magnitude of the previous evening. Perhaps it was the clarity that comes with finally closing an uncertain chapter. Or maybe it was simply exhaustion after months of careful planning. Either way, I felt refreshed and focused as I prepared for what would undoubtedly be a pivotal day in both my personal and professional life. My morning routine had evolved significantly since leaving James. Gone were the rushed preparations centered around making his breakfast and ensuring his shirts were perfectly pressed. Now, I moved through my spacious penthouse with deliberate calm, taking time for a quick meditation session, followed by a light workout in my home gym. Self-care wasn't selfish, as James had often implied. It was essential for maintaining the mental clarity required to lead effectively. At precisely 5:45 a.m., I stepped into my waiting car, dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected authority without ostentation. "Good morning, Thomas," I greeted my driver. "Luminary headquarters, please." "Early start today, Ms. Harrington," he observed, pulling smoothly into the light pre-dawn traffic. "Watershed days usually begin early," I replied, already reviewing the acquisition documents on my tablet. My team had worked through the night, refining our approach based on the latest intelligence from Meridian's increasingly nervous board members. The Luminary offices were already humming with activity when I arrived. Despite the early hour, key team members had gathered in the main conference room, armed with coffee and determination. Zoe immediately approached, handing me a freshly prepared espresso exactly the way I preferred it. Meridian's CFO called twice already this morning, she informed me, falling into step beside me. Apparently, their preliminary quarterly projections are even worse than we anticipated. They're eager to accelerate the acquisition timeline. I nodded, unsurprised. Desperation has a way of cutting through bureaucratic delays. Have legal prepared to modify the transition schedule if necessary. Elena Bradford was waiting in my office, studying a series of charts displayed on the wall-mounted screens. Their stock dropped another 7 points in after-hours trading, she noted without preamble. Word of our meeting must have leaked. James never could keep confidential information contained, I remarked, setting down my belongings. His tendency to share sensitive details with his inner circle cost Meridian several major contracts over the years. Speaking of James, Elena ventured carefully, have you considered his potential role post-acquisition? The board is concerned about possible disruption if he chooses to be difficult. I took a measured sip of my espresso, considering the question. James has two viable options: adapt to the new paradigm or leave with a reasonable severance package. His technical expertise is valuable, but his management approach is precisely what drove Meridian into decline. Elena studied me with the shrewd assessment that had made her such an effective chairwoman. This is remarkably clinical, considering your history. The personal aspects were addressed last night, I replied evenly. Today is purely business. We were interrupted by Leo Park, my CTO, who entered with an urgent expression. We've identified something concerning in Meridian's security infrastructure, he announced, projecting a complex diagram onto my office wall. Their client data protection has been compromised for potentially months. It's worse than we thought. I moved closer to the display, examining the vulnerability he'd highlighted. Have they been notified? Not yet. We discovered it during our pre-acquisition deep dive. Their security team either missed it or... He trailed off. Or deliberately concealed it, I finished, the implications immediately clear. Corporate negligence of this magnitude could trigger regulatory investigations and client lawsuits. Document everything. We'll address this during the board meeting. At 6:45 a.m., my executive team and I gathered for a final strategy session before facing Meridian's board. The room buzzed with focused energy as we reviewed our approach one last time. Remember, we're not just acquiring a competitor, I emphasized, to my team. We're salvaging valuable assets from a failing enterprise. Our primary responsibility is to Meridian's clients and employees who deserve better leadership than they've received. Victor Chen, my CFO, cleared his throat. Given the new security concerns, should we adjust our offer downward? The potential liability is significant. I considered this carefully. No adjustments. We maintain our original terms but add contingency clauses regarding undisclosed liabilities. This isn't about squeezing them further. It's about responsible transition of assets and protection of client interests. Heads nodded around the table. My team understood that while business acquisitions were often characterized by predatory tactics, our approach reflected Luminary's core values: transparency, innovation, and genuine client service, all principles I had outlined in my original business plan, the same one James had dismissed as naive idealism. At precisely 7 a.m., we entered Luminary's largest conference room where Meridian's board members were already waiting. The tension was palpable as we took our seats across from them. These were experienced business leaders, accustomed to wielding power and commanding respect. Today, however, they sat with the unmistakable air of suppressed panic. Lawrence Winters, Meridian's board chairman and James's longtime mentor, attempted to project confidence as he greeted me. Ms. Harrington, thank you for accommodating this urgent meeting. We're eager to discuss potential synergies between our organizations. Let's dispense with the euphemisms, Mr. Winters, I replied calmly. We're here to discuss Luminary's acquisition of Meridian under the terms outlined in yesterday's proposal. Given your company's current trajectory, synergy seems an optimistic characterization. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. I noted James's conspicuous absence but chose not to comment on it. Lawrence's forced smile faltered. Direct? As always, Olivia, if you don't mind, we have several questions about the valuation methodology used in your proposal. For the next hour, we engaged in the intricate dance of high-stakes business negotiation. Meridian's board attempted to assert leverage they no longer possessed, while my team methodically addressed each concern with data-driven precision. Throughout the discussion, I maintained a professional demeanor, never once alluding to my personal connection to their company, despite the fact that several board members had attended my wedding to James years earlier. There's an additional matter we need to address, I said finally, nodding to Leo, who projected the security vulnerability diagram onto the main screen. Our technical assessment has identified a significant breach in your client data protection framework. This vulnerability has existed for approximately 7 months, potentially exposing sensitive information from all your major clients. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several board members paled visibly, while others began whispering urgently to their neighbors. This is the first we've heard of any such vulnerability, Lawrence insisted, though his expression suggested otherwise. That's concerning, I noted, maintaining my composure. Your security team either failed to identify a critical threat or failed to report it appropriately. Neither scenario reflects well on current management practices. As the implications sank in, the mood in the room shifted perceptibly. What had begun as reluctant consideration of an unwelcome acquisition had transformed into recognition of a potential lifeline. If news of this security breach became public before the acquisition, Meridian's remaining value would evaporate overnight. Lawrence cleared his throat. Given this new information, we would like to request a brief recess to confer privately. Of course, I agreed, rising from my seat. My team and I will return in 30 minutes. I should note, however, that our offer stands as presented. The security concerns don't change our valuation. They simply underscore the urgency of implementing better management practices. As we exited to allow them privacy, Elena whispered, "Masterful. They're cornered now." "It's not about cornering them," I corrected quietly. "It's about illuminating the reality they've been avoiding." James always believed in maintaining the illusion of success rather than addressing fundamental problems. That approach has finally reached its inevitable conclusion. While Meridian's board deliberated, I took a moment to check my personal messages. Among them was a text from James. "Heard about the emergency board meeting. Not invited. Guess that says everything." I debated responding, but decided against it. Our personal closure had occurred last night. Professional consequences were now following their natural course. When we returned to the conference room 30 minutes later, the transformation was remarkable. Gone was the defensive posturing and attempted leverage. In its place was the grim acceptance of executives who recognized they had run out of options. Lawrence spoke for the group. "After careful consideration, we are prepared to accept Luminary's acquisition offer with 2 requests: expedited timeline to minimize market disruption, and confidentiality regarding the security matters you've identified." "The timeline can be accelerated," I confirmed. "As for confidentiality, we will handle the security vulnerabilities with appropriate discretion, but full transparency will be required with affected clients. Their protection must take priority over corporate reputation." What followed was the meticulous process of formalizing the acquisition agreement. Lawyers from both sides reviewed terms, conditions were clarified, and documents were prepared for signing. Throughout the proceedings, I caught several board members watching me with expressions ranging from grudging respect to outright bewilderment. I had transitioned in their minds from James's wife to the CEO who now controlled their professional futures. By 10:30 a.m., the preliminary acquisition agreement had been signed. Meridian Software, the company that had been James's pride and his father's legacy, would be integrated into Luminary Technologies over the next 60 days. Its name would continue as a division within our corporate structure, but its operations, management, and strategic direction would be completely transformed. As the Meridian board members filed out, Lawrence lingered behind. "I owe you an apology, Olivia," he said quietly. "Years ago, when you first shared your vision for digital security integration, I advised James to dismiss it as impractical. I was wrong. Perhaps if we had listened then. Business history is filled with pivotal moments of missed opportunity," I replied, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology. The question now is whether Meridian's leadership can adapt to a new paradigm where ideas are evaluated on merit rather than source. He nodded thoughtfully. "And James? What becomes of him in this new paradigm?" "That depends entirely on James," I answered truthfully. "His technical expertise is valuable, but his leadership approach is incompatible with Luminary's culture. He's welcome to remain in a suitable technical role if he can accept the new reality." Lawrence seemed to weigh my words carefully. Having known James since he was a young man, I'm not certain he possesses that capacity for adaptation. His father built Meridian on a foundation of tradition and hierarchy, concepts James internalized perhaps too deeply. "People can surprise you," I offered, thinking of my own transformation from accommodating wife to decisive CEO. Sometimes circumstances force growth that comfort never could. After Lawrence departed, my executive team gathered for a debriefing session. The mood was celebratory but focused. This acquisition represented not just a business triumph, but vindication of the very principles I had championed when founding Luminary. "I've drafted the announcement for release at market close," Zoe informed me, displaying the carefully worded press statement on her tablet. "We're emphasizing client benefits and technological integration rather than Meridian's financial distress." "Perfect," I approved. "And the employee communication plan?" Leo stepped forward. "Ready to implement. We'll be conducting department meetings starting tomorrow morning, addressing concerns and outlining the transition process. Initial focus will be on reassuring their technical teams that our integration values their expertise." I nodded, satisfied with the comprehensive approach. Their employees have been working under difficult conditions and poor leadership. Many of them have innovative ideas that were systematically suppressed. Our priority is creating an environment where they can finally thrive. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity: calls with major clients, coordination with legal teams, planning sessions with integration specialists. By late afternoon, everything was in place for the public announcement that would send ripples through the business community. At 3:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the scheduled release of our acquisition announcement, my assistant notified me that James was in the lobby, requesting to see me. "Did he mention the purpose of his visit?" I asked, surprised by the timing. "No, Ms. Harrington. He simply said it was urgent and personal." I considered refusing the meeting. Our personal business had been concluded the previous night, and any professional discussions should include appropriate team members. Yet something compelled me to grant his request. "Send him up," I decided, "but stay nearby. If this meeting extends beyond 15 minutes, interrupt with an urgent call." James entered my office with none of his usual commanding presence. Gone was the confident executive who had once patronized my business ideas. In his place stood someone I barely recognized, humbled perhaps, but also simmering with barely contained emotion. "You didn't waste any time," he observed, glancing around my office with its commanding view of the city. "The board signed the acquisition papers less than 12 hours after our divorce was finalized." "Business waits for no one," I replied, remaining seated behind my desk. "Especially businesses in Meridian's precarious position. What can I do for you, James?" "The announcement goes public in 3 minutes." He paced the length of my office, struggling to articulate whatever had driven him to this confrontation. "I built that company. he finally said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. After my father retired, I was the one who expanded into new markets, who secured the Davidson account, who made Meridian a respected name. You also ignored warning. Signs of market shifts, dismissed innovation as unnecessary risk, and created a culture where good ideas died in middle management, I countered calmly. Building something means little if you then systematically dismantle it through poor leadership. James flinched as though I'd struck him physically. Is that all this is to you? A clinical business assessment? 7 years of marriage reduced to a corporate takeover? You reduced our marriage to nothing the moment you brought Veronica to our anniversary dinner, I reminded him, keeping my voice level despite the emotional undercurrents. My business decisions since then have been exactly that, business. Meridian was failing long before our marriage ended. He stopped pacing, fixing me with an intense stare. What happens to me now? Lawrence says there might be a place for me in the new organization. There might, I acknowledged. Your technical expertise in systems architecture is valuable. The question is whether you can function effectively in a role where your ideas will be evaluated on merit rather than authority. Working for my ex-wife, he said bitterly. Working within a corporate structure that values innovation over tradition, I corrected. My relationship to you is irrelevant to your potential professional contribution. James laughed humorlessly. You've really done it, haven't you? Completely compartmentalized everything. The woman I married couldn't separate emotion from business decisions. That was what I always criticized about your approach. The woman you married evolved, James. Necessity is an effective teacher. I glanced at my watch. The announcement goes live in 1 minute. Was there something specific you needed to discuss? He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a flash drive, placing it carefully on my desk. The original security protocol design you proposed 3 years ago. I kept it, along with all. Your other proposals. Reviewed them last night after leaving the restaurant. You were right about everything, Olivia. Every single prediction about market evolution, client needs, digital transformation. All of it. I stared at the small device, momentarily speechless. James had not only kept my rejected proposals, but apparently studied them in detail. Why are you giving me this now? I finally asked. Because you should know that while I may have dismissed your ideas publicly, privately, I recognize their value. I was just too proud, too threatened by your vision to acknowledge it. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a leadership role in the new organization, but I am asking for the chance to contribute to implementing the very innovations I once rejected. Consider it my professional penance. Before I could respond, Zoe appeared at the door. Ms. Harrington, the announcement has gone live. We're already receiving press inquiries, and the Davidson team is online, one wanting to discuss accelerated integration. James nodded in understanding. Duty calls. I'll wait for your decision about my role. With that, he exited as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving me with the unexpected flash drive and even more unexpected vulnerability. Are you all right? Zoe asked, noting my momentary distraction. I regained my composure quickly. Yes, thank you. Connect the Davidson call to the conference room. I'll join the executive team there immediately. The remainder of the afternoon was consumed by the controlled chaos that follows major corporate announcements. Meridian's stock had been halted pending the acquisition news, while Luminary's shares jumped nearly 12% as analysts praised the strategic integration. Multiple media outlets requested interviews, employees from both companies flooded, HR with questions, and major clients sought reassurance about service continuity. Throughout it all, I maintained the calm, decisive leadership that had become my hallmark. Each question was addressed, each concern validated and resolved, each opportunity for positive messaging maximized. This was the environment where I thrived, complex, challenges requiring innovative solutions and clear communication. It was nearly 8 p.m. when I finally returned to my office, exhausted but satisfied with the day's outcomes. The acquisition announcement had been received even more positively than anticipated, with technology analysts particularly noting how Luminary's innovative security protocols would address Meridian's long-standing vulnerabilities. As I gathered my belongings to leave, my gaze fell on the flash drive James had left. Curiosity overcame my hesitation, and I inserted it into my computer. The drive contained not only my original proposals, but extensive notes James had apparently made after each rejection, detailed analyses that acknowledged the merit of my ideas, even as he publicly dismissed them. One document particularly caught my attention, dated the night before our fateful anniversary dinner a year ago. James had created a comprehensive assessment of my proposed security overhaul, concluding with a remarkable admission: implementation of O's security framework essential for maintaining competitive edge. Need to find way to adopt ideas without acknowledging source. Potential repackaging through R&D department. I sat back, momentarily stunned by the implications. James hadn't just dismissed my ideas. He had recognized their value and planned to implement them without crediting me. The betrayal was professional as well as personal, compounding the humiliation of that anniversary dinner in ways I hadn't even realized. My phone rang, interrupting this unsettling revelation. It was Elena, calling to congratulate me on the successful announcement and media response. The board is thrilled, she informed me. The Davidson deal alone justifies the acquisition price, and their public endorsement of our security protocols has already generated inquiries from 3 other major potential clients. That's excellent news, I responded, trying to refocus on present successes rather than past betrayals. There's just one question remaining, Elena continued. James Harrington. HR needs direction on his status within the new organization. Lawrence Winters made a strong case for retaining him in a technical advisory capacity, but given your history. I glanced again at the evidence of James's professional duplicity glowing on my screen. The easy response would be to terminate his position entirely, a clean break professionally to match our personal separation. Yet something made me hesitate. Create a position for him in the technical architecture team, I decided. No management authority, reporting directly to Leo Park. His institutional knowledge of Meridian systems will be valuable during integration, and his technical expertise is genuine despite his leadership failures. Are you certain? Elena questioned carefully. No one would blame you for making a different choice. I'm certain, I confirmed. Business decisions should be based on organizational benefit, not personal history. James has valuable skills to contribute within the right structure. After tea, ending the call, I removed the flash drive and placed it in my desk drawer. The past couldn't be changed, but how we moved forward, both personally and professionally, remained within our control. James would have an opportunity to contribute to implementing the very innovations he had once dismissed and attempted to appropriate. Whether this represented growth or punishment was perhaps a matter of perspective. As I finally left the office, the city lights glimmered against the darkening sky. It had been just 24 hours since I'd confronted James and Veronica at Castellini's, yet it felt like a lifetime had passed. In that short span, my marriage had formally ended, a major business acquisition had been completed, and my professional vision had been irrefutably validated. Thomas was waiting with the car, as reliable as always. Home, Ms. Harrington? Yes, I confirmed, settling into the back seat. It's been quite a day. Congratulations on the acquisition, he offered, pulling smoothly into traffic. It was all over the financial news this evening. Thank you, Thomas. I gazed out at the city sliding past my window, the same views I'd seen countless times before, yet somehow everything looked different now. Sometimes the end of one chapter enables the beginning of something much more significant. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Forgot to mention, flowers arrived for you this afternoon. Had them sent to your apartment. Card said, "Congratulations on creating what I couldn't imagine. You've built something remarkable." No signature. I didn't need a signature to recognize the sender. James had always expressed himself more genuinely through gestures than words. The acknowledgement wasn't necessary for my validation, but there was a certain symmetry to it. The man who had once dismissed my vision, now recognizing its realization. As the car approached my building, I mentally reviewed the next day's intensive schedule, integration planning sessions, employee town halls at both companies, client reassurance calls, media interviews. The work of transforming two distinct corporate cultures into one cohesive organization was just beginning. It would be challenging, complex, and occasionally uncomfortable, particularly for those accustomed to Meridian's hierarchical approach. Yet as I entered my apartment and spotted the elegant arrangement of orchids, not roses or lilies, but my true favorite flowers that James had apparently finally noticed, I felt a quiet confidence. The journey from humiliated wife to respected CEO had taught me that transformation, while difficult, was always possible. Meridian could evolve. Perhaps James could too. I placed my laptop on the kitchen counter and poured a single glass of champagne, not to celebrate the acquisition or the divorce, but to acknowledge the completion of a personal journey. 1 year ago, I had fled that anniversary dinner in tears. My professional confidence shattered alongside my marital trust. Tonight, I stood in full possession of both my personal worth and professional power. The late-night city lights twinkled beyond my windows as I considered what tomorrow would bring. There would be challenges, certainly, integrating resistant team members, addressing cultural conflicts, managing the technical complexities of system migration. Yet these were exactly the kinds of problems I excelled at solving: complex, multifaceted, challenges requiring both emotional intelligence and strategic thinking. My phone rang once more. Richard Davidson, calling well after business hours. "Olivia, forgive the late call, but I wanted to personally congratulate you. What you've accomplished is remarkable." "Thank you, Richard. The Davidson account was instrumental in making this integration viable." "It's more than that," he countered. "You've demonstrated extraordinary vision, seeing potential where others saw only tradition, creating opportunity from challenge. The business community is taking notice in ways that transcend this particular acquisition." After we ended the call, I moved to my home office where a single framed document hung on the wall. The original business plan for Luminary Technologies, with its emphasis on innovative security protocols and client-centered design. The very approach James had dismissed as unrealistic idealism had now become the standard toward which the entire industry was shifting. Tomorrow would begin the practical work of transformation. Systems would be integrated, teams would be restructured, processes would be reimagined. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the symmetry of it all. The husband who had brought his lover to our anniversary dinner could never have imagined that his betrayal would catalyze not just the end of our marriage, but the transformation of an entire business ecosystem. I hadn't set out to acquire Meridian as an act of revenge. I had simply built something better, something based on innovation rather than tradition, on merit rather than hierarchy, on future potential rather than past glory. That my success had ultimately positioned me to save the very company that had dismissed my ideas was perhaps not justice, but certainly poetic in its perfect circular narrative. As I finally prepared for sleep, I found myself thinking not about the past, but about the future. The innovations we would develop, the talent we would nurture, the business landscape we would help reshape. The anniversary dinner that had once symbolized personal humiliation had been reclaimed as the launching point for professional transformation. Some endings, I reflected as sleep finally claimed me, contain within them the seeds of much more significant beginnings. The true test of character lies not in avoiding painful endings, but in what we choose to grow from the fertile ground of their aftermath. The first day of integration between Luminary and Meridian dawned with the controlled chaos that accompanies any major corporate merger. I arrived at the Meridian headquarters at precisely 7:30 a.m., a full hour before the scheduled all-hands meeting where employees would receive detailed information about their future. The imposing glass and steel building that had once intimidated me as James's domain now felt different. Not a fortress to be conquered, but a structure in need of renovation. Quite different from our offices, Elena observed as we walked. Through the ornate marble lobby with its dated wood paneling and traditional portraits of company founders. The contrast with Luminary's sleek, modern workspace couldn't have been more striking. Form follows function, I replied, noting how the physical architecture reflected the company's resistance to change. The environment we create shapes how people think and work. Lawrence Winters was waiting in the executive conference room, along with Meridian's remaining leadership team. James was notably absent, though I'd been informed he would attend the all-hands meeting. The nervous energy in the room was palpable. These were executives who had spent decades building careers within a rigid hierarchy, now facing an uncertain future under new leadership. "Thank you all for being here early," I began, taking my position at the head of the table that had once been reserved exclusively for Meridian's CEO and founder. Today marks the beginning of a significant transition for both our organizations. How we manage the next 60 days will determine our long-term success. For the next 45 minutes, I outlined the integration process in precise detail, which departments would merge immediately, which would undergo gradual transformation, and which needed complete restructuring. There were no platitudes about synergy or vague promises of minimal disruption. Instead, I provided clear timelines, specific benchmarks, and honest assessments of the challenges ahead. Most mergers fail because of culture clash and ambiguous expectations, I explained, meeting each executive's gaze directly. We will not make those mistakes. Transparency, accountability, and innovation will guide every decision. Marcus Reynolds, Meridian's head of sales, cleared his throat nervously. And the leadership structure? There's considerable anxiety among the management team about reporting lines. All existing management positions will be evaluated over the next 30 days, I replied candidly. Those who demonstrate adaptability, innovation, and collaborative leadership will find ample opportunity in the integrated organization. Those who cannot adjust to our cultural values will be offered appropriate severance packages. The room fell silent as the reality sank in. This wasn't a traditional acquisition where existing power structures would be delicately preserved. This was a fundamental transformation that would require genuine change from everyone, especially those accustomed to authority based on tenure rather than merit. This sounds like a complete dismantling of systems that have served Meridian for decades, Lawrence observed, his tone measured but concerned. With respect, Mr. Winters, those systems haven't served Meridian well for quite some time, I countered, displaying a chart of the company's declining performance metrics. What worked in the past has demonstrably failed in the present. Our task now is to build something that will succeed in the future. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, we moved to the company auditorium where nearly 300 anxious Meridian employees had gathered. The room buzzed with whispered conversations and speculation. Many were seeing me for the first time, knowing me only as James's ex-wife, rather than the CEO who now controlled their professional futures. I spotted James standing at the back of the room, his expression carefully neutral as he observed the proceedings. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded space, a silent acknowledgement of the extraordinary reversal in our professional dynamic. Taking the stage, I waited for the room to quiet before addressing the assembled employees. Good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Olivia Harrington, CEO of Luminary Technologies. As of yesterday, our companies have officially merged under Luminary's management structure. I understand that creates uncertainty, and I'm here to address that directly. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined the same integration plan I'd shared with the executive team, emphasizing that performance and innovation, not tenure or title, would determine each person's place in the new organization. Throughout my presentation, I noticed a subtle shift in the audience's energy. What had begun as apprehension was evolving into cautious interest, particularly among the younger employees. Many of you have ideas that were dismissed under previous management, I noted, watching several heads nod in recognition. Innovative solutions that never made it past middle management. Security enhancements deemed too disruptive to implement. Client-centered approaches considered too radical. That ends today. I introduced the Digital Innovation Portal, a platform where every employee could submit ideas directly to the integration team, bypassing traditional hierarchies. Your voice matters. Your expertise matters. Every submission will be evaluated on merit alone, regardless of your position or tenure. As I concluded my presentation and opened the floor for questions, the first hand raised belonged to Sophia Chen, a junior security specialist I recognized from my pre-acquisition research. She had submitted multiple security enhancement proposals that had been consistently shelved by Meridian's management. Ms. Harrington, are you referring to specific proposals that were rejected? She asked, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and skepticism. Because some of us have been trying to address security vulnerabilities for years without success. I am indeed, Ms. Chen, I confirmed, pulling up her most recent proposal on the presentation screen. This security framework you developed 8 months ago is remarkably aligned with Luminary's approach. Had it been implemented when you first proposed it, the vulnerability we identified during due diligence would never have existed. The auditorium erupted in murmurs as employees processed this revelation. Sophia's face reflected stunned vindication, while several middle managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "How did you know about my proposal?" she asked, clearly surprised to be recognized. Thorough due diligence involves examining not just what a company did, but what it chose not to do, I explained. The solutions to Meridian's most pressing problems already existed within its talent pool. They were simply buried by a management structure that prioritized tradition over innovation. From the back of the room, James had not moved, though his expression had shifted from neutral observation to something more complex, perhaps recognition of the patterns I was describing, patterns he himself had perpetuated. The questions continued for another hour, ranging from practical concerns about benefit packages to deeper inquiries about cultural integration. Throughout the session, I maintained direct, transparent communication, never sugarcoating challenges, but consistently emphasizing the opportunities that lay ahead. In closing, I said finally, I want to address something many of you are undoubtedly wondering about. Yes, James Harrington and I were married. Yes, our personal relationship has ended. But this acquisition was not personal revenge. It was sound business strategy. Meridian has valuable assets, dedicated talent, and untapped potential. Luminary has the vision and structure to maximize those strengths. Judge the integration process on its results, not on its backstory. As the meeting concluded, employees filed out with noticeably different energy than when they had arrived. Uncertainty remained, certainly, but it was now tempered with genuine curiosity about the changes to come. Several approached me directly, including Sophia Chen, who waited until most had departed. "Thank you for acknowledging my work," she said quietly. "I was beginning to think I was the problem, that my ideas were genuinely flawed rather than just inconvenient to the status quo." "Your insights were always valuable, Sophia," I assured her. "They simply required a different environment to be recognized. I'd like you to join our core security team effective immediately." Her eyes widened. "Really? Just like that?" "Merit-based advancement isn't complicated when you actually practice it," I replied with a smile. Leo Park, our CTO, will contact you this afternoon to discuss details. As Sophia departed, visibly energized by this unexpected opportunity, James finally approached from his position at the back of the auditorium. He had watched the entire proceedings without comment, observing the organization he had led now responding to new leadership. "Impressive presentation," he acknowledged, maintaining a professional tone despite our personal history. "You've given them something many haven't had here for years: hope." "Hope backed by concrete action," I clarified. "Sentiment without structural change is meaningless in business." He nodded slowly. "I received the notification about my new position on the technical architecture team, reporting to Leo Park, no management responsibilities." "Your technical expertise is valuable," I explained matter-of-factly. "Your management approach was not aligned with our direction. The position leverages your strengths while minimizing potential conflicts." "Logical," James conceded, though I could see the adjustment was still difficult for him. "And surprisingly, generous, considering what you found on that flash drive." I studied him carefully, noting the unfamiliar humility in his bearing. The James I had married would have reacted to such a demotion with indignation or strategic maneuvering. This version seemed genuinely accepting of his new circumstances. "The past can't be changed," I said finally. "How we proceed from here is what matters now. You have an opportunity to contribute meaningfully to the very innovations you once rejected. Whether that represents growth or irony is entirely up to you." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Perhaps both. Will you be working directly with the integration team here?" "For the next 2 weeks, yes. This building will serve as our primary integration hub until we identify which functions to consolidate at Luminary headquarters." James hesitated before asking, "And the Davidson account? I assume you'll be managing that personally given their significance to both companies." "Actually, Richard Davidson specifically requested that Sophia Chen be assigned as their primary technical contact," I informed him, watching his reaction carefully. Apparently, her security proposals impressed them during yesterday's transition briefing. The news clearly surprised him, another reversal of the old order where prestigious accounts were reserved for senior management, regardless of technical fit. "Sophia is quite junior," he observed, the old hierarchical thinking momentarily reasserting itself. "Sophia is exceptionally talented," I corrected. "Client relationships should be managed by those best equipped to understand and address specific needs, not by those with the most impressive titles." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Leo Park and the integration team, ready to begin the detailed work of systems analysis. James nodded in acknowledgement of our discussion's conclusion. "I should get to the technical architecture meeting. My new supervisor has scheduled an orientation session." As he walked away, I noticed a fundamental change in his demeanor. The confident stride that had once dominated every room had been replaced by something more measured, more thoughtful. Whether this transformation would prove lasting remained to be seen, but it suggested possibilities I hadn't anticipated. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of integration activities, department assessments, personnel interviews, systems audits, and client communications. By late afternoon, our team had identified several critical areas requiring immediate attention, particularly in security infrastructure and client relationship management. "It's worse than we thought," Leo reported during our progress meeting. "Their system architecture is fundamentally incompatible with modern security protocols. It's not just outdated, it's actively resistant to necessary upgrades." "Just like the management that designed it," Elena observed wryly. "Form following function indeed." I studied the technical diagrams Leo had presented. "Complete overhaul rather than integration, then. How soon can we migrate their client data to our architecture?" "With a dedicated team working around the key clock. 3 weeks minimum. There are legacy systems here that haven't been updated in nearly a decade." This woman, who had been instrumental in the betrayal of my marriage, was now expressing trust in my professional integrity. The boundaries between personal and professional had never been more blurred. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," I said finally. "Human Resources will process your resignation and arrange for an appropriate separation package. As for these documents, they will be reviewed by our legal team and handled according to regulatory requirements." Veronica stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I didn't know you were still married when things started with James. He told me you were separated and focused exclusively on your company. By the time I realized the truth, well, I had compromised myself both personally and professionally." I didn't respond immediately, considering the complex dynamics at play. Veronica had been both victim and participant in James's deceptions, just as I had once been. The parallel was uncomfortable, but undeniable. "We all make choices based on the information available to us," I said finally. "The question is what we do when better information reveals those choices were flawed. You've made yours today. I respect that." After she departed, I immediately contacted our legal counsel to discuss the implications of the documents Veronica had provided. The revelations complicated an already complex integration process and created potential legal exposure that needed careful management. "This changes the compliance framework for the entire acquisition," our lead counsel advised after reviewing the materials. "We're legally obligated to disclose these violations to regulators, which could trigger investigations into Meridian's previous leadership." "Including James," I noted, understanding the full implications. "Primarily James, based on these documents. He was ultimately responsible for information security compliance as COO. I considered our options carefully. The simplest approach from a business perspective would be to handle the matter quietly, implement the necessary security upgrades while managing regulatory disclosures to minimize negative publicity. Yet that path felt uncomfortably similar to the very culture of concealment that had created these problems initially. "We proceed with full transparency," I decided. "Disclose the vulnerabilities to regulators, implement immediate remediation for affected clients, and cooperate fully with any resulting investigations. Meridian's culture of concealment ends today." The decision would undoubtedly create short-term complications for the integration process, potentially affecting Luminary's stock price and client confidence. Yet the alternative, perpetuating the very practices we were seeking to transform, was unacceptable both practically and ethically. By late evening, the legal and compliance teams had developed a comprehensive response plan. Affected clients would be notified within 24 hours, regulatory disclosures would be filed the following morning, and a dedicated team would accelerate the security infrastructure migration. The approach wasn't without risk, but it aligned with the core values I had established when founding Luminary. As I prepared to leave for the day, Leo Park requested a brief meeting to discuss an unexpected development. "James came to me this afternoon with something interesting," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "He's developed a transitional architecture that could accelerate our security migration by nearly 2 weeks. It's actually brilliant." He displayed the technical diagrams James had created, an elegant solution that would allow for faster data migration while maintaining enhanced security during the transition period. The approach demonstrated genuine technical expertise coupled with innovative thinking I hadn't previously associated with James's work. "He developed this today?" I asked, studying the detailed plans. Leo nodded. "Apparently, he started working on it immediately after this morning's all-hands meeting. Said he'd been thinking about security architecture from the wrong perspective and wanted to contribute something meaningful to the transition. The timing was significant, suggesting James had conceived this solution before Veronica revealed his previous concealment of security vulnerabilities. While that revelation would soon create serious professional and possibly legal challenges for him, This contribution indicated a genuine attempt to add value in his new, reduced role. Implement it, I decided after thorough review. The approach is sound and addresses our most pressing integration concerns. Give James appropriate credit for the innovation. Leo seemed surprised by my last directive. You're sure? Given what's likely to happen once the compliance issues become public. Professional merit exists independently of personal failures. This timeline was concerning, but not surprising. Meridian had built its reputation on stability and tradition, qualities that had once been strengths but had calcified into liabilities as the market evolved. The technical infrastructure reflected the same resistance to change that had characterized their business approach. Allocate whatever resources necessary, I directed. Security vulnerabilities take priority over all other integration concerns. As our meeting concluded, my assistant approached with an unexpected update. Ms. Harrington, Veronica Reynolds is in the lobby requesting to see you. She doesn't have an appointment but says it's important. I paused, momentarily surprised by this development. Veronica had been conspicuously absent from the morning's all-hands meeting despite her position as James's executive assistant. Did she indicate the purpose of her visit? No, but she seems distressed. Security wasn't sure whether to send her away given the circumstances. I considered the request carefully. Professional boundaries would suggest declining the meeting. Veronica's role in my personal history created potential complications in the already complex integration process. Yet curiosity prevailed. I'll see her in the small conference room. Ensure Leo knows where to find me if the security team needs immediate decisions. Veronica appeared markedly different from the confident woman who had accompanied James to our anniversary dinner. Her typically impeccable appearance showed signs of hasty preparation, and her expression conveyed genuine anxiety. "Thank you for seeing me," she began awkwardly, remaining standing despite my gesture toward a chair. "I wasn't sure you would. Professional courtesy extends to all Meridian employees during the transition," I replied neutrally. "How can I help you, Ms. Reynolds?" She finally took a seat, nervously arranging and rearranging the folder she carried. "I wanted to speak with you directly before rumors start circulating. James and our relationship has ended. I've submitted my resignation effective immediately." This was unexpected news, though not entirely surprising given the dramatic shift in circumstances. "Your personal relationship with James is not my concern," I noted carefully. "And while I appreciate your notification, resignations should be directed to human resources, not to me personally." "There's more to it," she insisted, opening the folder she'd brought. "These are documents James asked me to safeguard 6 months ago. I didn't understand their significance at the time, but after yesterday's events..." She pushed the folder across the table toward me. Inside were printed copies of internal communications regarding Meridian's security vulnerabilities, specifically multiple warnings from the technical team about potential breaches that had been systematically downplayed or buried. Most disturbing were James's explicit instructions to contain this information within senior management and maintain client confidence through strategic disclosure limitations. In essence, James had deliberately concealed known security, risks from clients and shareholders, potentially violating multiple regulatory requirements in the process. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, keeping my expression neutral despite the seriousness of what I was reviewing. Veronica met my gaze directly for the first time. "Because I was complicit in something I didn't fully understand, and I don't want to be part of covering it up any longer. And because..." She hesitated, clearly struggling with her next words. "Because I owe you that much, at least." The admission hung in the air between us, an acknowledgement of her role not just in the professional deception, but in our personal history as well. "Did James ask you to destroy these documents?" I questioned, my mind already calculating the legal and regulatory implications. She nodded. Last night, after the acquisition announcement, he said they could complicate the transition and that they weren't relevant anymore since Luminary would be implementing new security measures anyway. The revelation created a complex ethical dilemma. These documents confirmed that James had not merely been negligent in addressing security concerns, but had actively concealed known vulnerabilities, a potentially criminal action that could have significant repercussions not just for him personally, but for the entire acquisition process. You understand that I have legal obligations regarding this information, I said carefully. These documents indicate potential securities violations that may require regulatory disclosure. I know, she acknowledged, her professional demeanor returning somewhat. That's partly why I brought them directly to you. I trust you'll handle them appropriately. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me, I replied, applying the same principle to James that I had emphasized throughout the integration process. His previous actions will have consequences, but this contribution has value on its own terms. We recognize both accordingly. As I finally left the building, the evening sky had darkened completely, city lights illuminating the Meridian headquarters I had once viewed as James's impenetrable domain. Now it was simply another business asset in transition, valuable in some aspects, deeply flawed in others, ultimately subject to the same market forces and ethical standards as any organization. Thomas was waiting with the car, his reliability a constant in these days of rapid change. Long day, Ms. Harrington? Consequential day, I amended, settling into the back seat. Sometimes the hardest part of transformation isn't identifying what needs to change, but implementing those changes with appropriate balance between urgency and care. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Elena, who had returned to Luminary headquarters while I remained at Meridian for the day's integration activities. The preliminary client response data is in, she reported without preamble. 93% express increased confidence following today's transparency initiative. Davidson is particularly pleased with Sophia Chen's involvement. This was welcome news amid the complexities of the day. And internally, how are the Meridian employees responding to the integration approach? Mixed but trending positive, Elena replied. Younger staff and technical teams are enthusiastic about the innovation opportunities. Middle management remains anxious, as expected. But overall, the uncertainty is evolving into cautious optimism. After concluding the call, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary pace of transformation unfolding across both personal and professional domains. Just days ago, James had been a company executive secure in his position and authority. Now he faced potential regulatory investigations, demotion to a technical role, the end of his relationship with Veronica, and the public dismantling of the business practices he had championed. The scale of this reversal might once have provided satisfaction given our personal history. Yet, what I felt instead was a more nuanced recognition of how quickly circumstances could change for anyone, how success or failure often hinged on the ability to adapt to new realities rather than clinging to comfortable patterns. As the car approached my building, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message from James. Just heard about Veronica's resignation and the security documentation she provided. I understand what comes next and accept full responsibility. For whatever it's worth, I'm genuinely sorry. Not just for the personal betrayal, but for the professional compromises that led us here. The transitional architecture design was my attempt to contribute something positive before the inevitable consequences arrive. No expectation of leniency intended. The message reflected a self-awareness I hadn't previously associated with James. Whether this represented genuine growth or merely strategic positioning ahead of potential legal challenges remained unclear. Perhaps elements of both were present, just as most human motivations contain complex mixtures of authentic and calculated impulses. I chose not to respond immediately, needing time to process both the professional implications and personal complexities. Whatever James's intentions, The regulatory process would proceed according to legal requirements rather than personal considerations. His acknowledgement of responsibility was appropriate, but wouldn't alter the necessary consequences of his actions. Entering my apartment, I found myself unexpectedly drained by the day's events. The integration process was proceeding more effectively than anticipated in many respects, yet the discovery of deliberate security concealment had introduced complications that would require careful navigation in the days ahead. I poured a glass of water and moved to my home office, reviewing the day's developments and preparing for tomorrow's challenges. The regulatory disclosure would likely trigger media scrutiny not just of Meridian's past practices, but of Luminary's acquisition decision. Managing that narrative while maintaining focus on the integration process would require precise messaging and unwavering commitment to transparency. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Sophia Chen. Ms. Harrington, the Davidson implementation team just confirmed they want to accelerate their security migration. They specifically requested our innovative approach after today's briefing. This is everything I hoped for when I first joined Meridian 3 years ago. Thank you for the opportunity to finally implement what I've been designing all this time. Her enthusiasm provided a welcome reminder of why this acquisition mattered beyond financial metrics or personal history. For talented professionals like Sophia, the integration created opportunities that had been systematically denied under previous leadership. Their innovations could now flourish in an environment that valued merit over hierarchy and forward thinking over tradition. As I prepared for sleep, I found myself considering the stark contrast between my current circumstances and those of exactly 1 year ago, the night I had discovered James and Veronica together at our anniversary dinner. That painful moment had initiated a journey I could never have anticipated, transforming not just my personal life, but my professional trajectory and the business landscape itself. The husband who had brought his lover to our anniversary dinner could never have imagined the consequences that would unfold from that betrayal. The company board of directors I had brought to that same restaurant a year later had been merely the visible manifestation of a much deeper transformation, one that continued to reveal new dimensions with each passing day. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, regulatory disclosures, client communications, integration complexities, and the continued evolution of Meridian's corporate culture. Yet it would also bring opportunities for genuine innovation, for talented individuals to finally contribute their best ideas, for business practices to align with ethical principles rather than hierarchical convenience. As sleep finally claimed me, I reflected that true transformation was never simple or linear. It involved complicated ethical choices, unexpected revelations, and the continuous balancing of accountability with opportunity. The integration of Luminary and Meridian would continue to present such complexities, just as my own journey from betrayed wife to transformative leader had followed a path with numerous unexpected turns. The fundamental question remained not whether challenges would arise, but how we would respond to them, with truth or concealment, with innovation or tradition, with growth or stagnation. In business as in life, those choices ultimately defined not just our circumstances, but our character. 1 month into the integration process, Luminary's headquarters buzzed with an energy that felt fundamentally different from the tension that had characterized the early days of the acquisition. What had begun as uncertainty and resistance had gradually transformed into purposeful innovation as employees from both companies found their footing in the new organizational structure. I paused at the entrance to our newly expanded innovation center, observing the collaborative teams at work. Meridian's technical specialists, who had once operated in silos, were now engaged in animated discussions with Luminary's development teams. The physical space itself reflected our integrated approach, open and transparent, with flexible work areas designed to facilitate collaboration rather than reinforce hierarchy. Quite a change from that first week, Elena remarked, joining me at the observation window. Remember how they wouldn't even sit together during the initial integration sessions? I nodded, recalling the visible divide that had initially separated employees from the two companies. Cultural transformation is always the most challenging aspect of any acquisition. Technical systems can be reconfigured more easily than human perspectives. Speaking of transformation, Elena continued, checking her tablet, the Q1 results are finalized. Client retention has exceeded projections by 17%, and the Davidson implementation has been completed 2 weeks. Ahead of schedule, this was welcome news, particularly given the turbulence caused by the regulatory disclosures we had filed regarding Meridian's security vulnerabilities. As expected, those revelations had triggered an SEC investigation into the previous management's handling of material information, with James as the primary focus of inquiry. And the security migration? I asked, knowing this represented our most critical integration priority. 97% complete, thanks largely to the transitional architecture James designed. Leo says it's the most elegant solution he's seen for bridging legacy systems with modern security protocols. The mention of James brought a familiar complexity to our discussion. In the weeks following Veronica's revelations, he had maintained a strictly professional approach, focusing entirely on technical contributions while cooperating fully with regulatory investigators. His role had been further complicated by the public nature of the SEC inquiry, which had generated significant media coverage and scrutiny. Any update on the SEC timeline? I asked, knowing the investigation's resolution would impact our final integration phases. Elena nodded. Their preliminary findings indicate the violations were serious, but contained primarily to James and 2 other senior executives. The formal settlement terms should be announced this week. We were interrupted by Sophia Chen, who approached with barely contained excitement. Ms. Harrington, the Davidson team just completed their first full security cycle under the new architecture. 0 vulnerabilities detected, and client access metrics show a 43% improvement in user experience. Excellent work, Sophia, I acknowledged, genuinely impressed by her leadership of this critical implementation. Please share detailed metrics with the integration team for inclusion in our board presentation. As Sophia departed, visibly energized by this success, I noted how dramatically her professional presence had evolved in just 1 month. The hesitant junior specialist whose ideas had been repeatedly dismissed at Meridian had transformed into a confident technical leader whose expertise was now recognized and valued. She's not the only one thriving in the new environment, Elena observed, gesturing toward a nearby conference room where several former Meridian employees were leading a strategy session. The talent that was suppressed under the previous management structure is finally emerging. This was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the integration process, watching capable professionals find their voice and contribute meaningful innovations once the artificial constraints of hierarchy had been removed. The cultural transformation was far from complete, but the trajectory was undeniably positive. My afternoon schedule included a series of meetings with key clients, regulatory representatives, and integration team leaders. Each conversation reinforced the growing evidence that our approach to the acquisition, prioritizing transparency, innovation, and merit-based advancement, was yielding significant benefits despite the initial challenges. Richard Davidson was particularly emphatic during our quarterly review call. The security implementation has exceeded all expectations, he noted, his satisfaction evident even through the conference line. Sophia's team has delivered precisely what Meridian promised for years but never actually provided. We're already discussing expanding our service agreement to include 3 additional divisions. This endorsement from our most significant client partnership validated the core business strategy behind the acquisition. Despite the regulatory complications and cultural challenges, the fundamental value proposition remained sound. Integrating Meridian's client relationships with Luminary's innovative approaches created meaningful enhancements for all stakeholders. Thank you, Richard, I responded. Sophia and her team deserve full credit for the implementation success. Their technical expertise was always present. It simply needed the right environment to flourish. After concluding the client calls, I prepared for what promised to be the most challenging meeting of the day. James had requested a brief discussion regarding the SEC investigation's impending resolution. Given the sensitivity of both the regulatory matters and our personal history, I had arranged for our legal counsel to attend as well. James arrived precisely on time, his appearance noticeably different from the confident executive who had once dominated Meridian's corporate hierarchy. The expensive suits had been replaced by more practical attire, appropriate to his technical role, and the authoritative bearing had given way to a more measured presence. "Thank you for making time," he began as we settled in the conference room. "I wanted to discuss the SEC announcement before it becomes public." Victoria Matthews, our chief legal officer, opened the relevant files. "The settlement terms have been finalized this morning. The Commission has accepted the remediation steps we implemented immediately following the vulnerability disclosures, which significantly mitigated potential penalties." James nodded, his expression revealing he was already aware of these developments. "And the personal liability determination?" Victoria glanced at me before responding, clearly cognizant of the complex dynamics at play. "The Commission has determined that primary responsibility rests with you as Chief Operating Officer, with secondary findings against the former CIO and Head of Compliance. The settlement includes a substantial financial penalty and a 5-year prohibition from serving as an officer or director of any public company. Though this outcome had been anticipated, the formal confirmation nevertheless carried significant weight. James's career as a corporate executive was effectively over, at least for the foreseeable future. The financial penalties, while substantial, were likely manageable given his resources. The reputational impact, however, would be permanent. "I understand," he acknowledged quietly. "The determination is fair based on the evidence. I've authorized my attorneys to accept the terms without contest." His acceptance of responsibility represented another departure from the James one had known during our marriage, a man who had consistently deflected accountability and rationalized questionable decisions. Whether this reflected genuine growth or merely pragmatic recognition of his limited options remained unclear. "There's another matter I wanted to address," he continued after a brief pause. "The transitional security architecture has been successfully implemented and the technical integration is nearly complete. My role in that process is effectively concluded." "Your contributions have been valuable," I acknowledged, maintaining a professional tone despite the personal undercurrents. "Leo speaks highly of your technical solutions." "Thank you," James replied, seeming genuinely appreciative of the recognition. "Nevertheless, I believe my continued presence may create unnecessary complications for the final integration phases, particularly once the SEC announcement becomes public. I've therefore decided to resign effective immediately." This decision, while not entirely unexpected, nevertheless required careful consideration from both business and personal perspectives. James's technical expertise remained valuable to the integration process, yet his association with the security violations undeniably created potential complications for Luminary's corporate reputation. "Have you considered alternative arrangements?" I asked, setting aside prepared talking points in favor of direct engagement. "Your technical contributions could continue in a consulting capacity with appropriate structural separation from operational decisions." James shook his head slowly. "I appreciate the consideration, but a clean break would be best for all parties. The company deserves to move forward without the complications my presence inevitably creates. And personally, I need to rebuild from a foundation that isn't constantly reminding me of past failures." The vulnerability in this last statement was striking, another departure from the carefully controlled image he had maintained throughout our marriage. The SEC investigation had stripped away more than his professional authority. It had dismantled the self-perception that had governed his actions for decades. Victoria excused herself discreetly, recognizing that the conversation had shifted from legal matters to personal considerations that required privacy. As the door closed behind her, James and I faced each other directly for the first time since the integration began. "Where will you go?" I asked, genuine concern transcending our complicated history. "West Coast initially. I've been offered a position with a private technology research firm, non-managerial, focused exclusively on security architecture design. No client contact, no public role, just technical problem solving." He managed a small smile. "Essentially, what I should have been doing all along before pride and position became more important than purpose." The self-awareness in this assessment was perhaps the most surprising element of our conversation. The James I had married had been defined by his attachment to status and authority, qualities that had shaped both his professional decisions and our personal dynamic. "Technical innovation was always your genuine strength," I acknowledged truthfully. "The management role simply aligned with expectations, your father's, the industry's, perhaps your own." He nodded slowly, accepting this assessment of his career path. "The irony isn't lost on me. I dismissed your business insights for years, only to discover you understood both the industry and my capabilities better than I did myself." This acknowledgement hung between us. Not quite an apology, but a recognition of truths that had shaped our shared history. For a moment, neither of us spoke, allowing the weight of these realizations to settle into the space between past regrets and future possibilities. "Human Resources will process your resignation with the standard executive separation package," I said finally, returning to practical matters. "Your technical contributions during the integration will be formally acknowledged in the transition documentation." "That's more than fair," James replied, standing to indicate our meeting was concluding. "I've left comprehensive documentation of the security architecture with Leo's team. Everything is structured for seamless continuation without my involvement." As he prepared to leave, James paused at the door, seeming to consider his final words carefully. "The anniversary dinner a year ago. Bringing Veronica was inexcusable, both personally and professionally. I could offer explanations about feeling threatened by your success or needing to assert control as my own career stagnated. But ultimately, it reflected fundamental character failings on my part." The directness of this statement caught me by surprise. Throughout our marriage, James had excelled at justifying his actions rather than acknowledging their impact. This unqualified recognition of harm represented genuine evolution, whatever its motivation. "We can't change the past," I replied after a thoughtful pause, "but we can choose how it informs our future decisions. Your technical contributions during this transition suggest you've already begun that process." James nodded once in acknowledgement before departing, closing a chapter that had begun with personal betrayal and concluded with professional transformation. Whatever path he followed from this point would be shaped by lessons learned through significant consequences, perhaps the only effective teacher for someone who had long believed himself beyond accountability. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of integration activities, client communications, and preparation for the following morning's board meeting. As news of James's resignation circulated, reactions varied predictably. Relief from those who had viewed his continued presence as problematic, concern from others about potential technical continuity issues. "His departure is strategically timed," Elena observed during our evening preparation session. "The SEC announcement tomorrow would have created uncomfortable dynamics regardless of his contributions to the integration." "The timing was his choice," I noted, recognizing that James's decision reflected awareness of these realities. Sometimes the most valuable contribution someone can make is recognizing when their presence has become more liability than asset. By 9 p.m., the board presentation was finalized, comprehensive integration metrics had been compiled, and communication plans for the SEC announcement had been approved by legal counsel. The acquisition that had begun with personal revelation at an anniversary dinner had evolved into a textbook case of corporate transformation, complete with unexpected challenges, strategic pivots, and ultimately successful outcomes. As the integration team departed for the evening, Sophia Chen lingered behind, clearly wanting to discuss something beyond the technical metrics we had just reviewed. "Is there something else, Sophia?" I inquired, noting her hesitation. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, unusual emotion evident in her typically analytical demeanor. "Not just for the professional opportunities, but for showing that it's possible to lead through transformation without compromising either performance standards or ethical principles." Her words touched on something fundamental about the integration journey, the delicate balance between driving necessary change and maintaining core values throughout the process. Many corporate acquisitions sacrificed one for the other, pursuing efficiency at the expense of ethics or preserving culture at the cost of needed evolution. The most sustainable transformations honor what works while changing what doesn't, I replied, sharing a principle that had guided my approach since founding Luminary. Your success with the Davidson implementation exemplifies exactly that balance, building on Meridian's client relationships while implementing Luminary's innovative approaches. After Sophia departed, I found myself alone in the office, surrounded by evidence of what had been accomplished in just 1 month of integration. The security vulnerabilities had been addressed, client relationships had been strengthened, and talented professionals had found new opportunities to contribute meaningfully. On my desk sat the final integration dashboard, displaying key metrics that would be presented to the board the following morning. Client retention had exceeded projections by 22%. System security vulnerabilities had been reduced by 98%. Employee engagement scores from former Meridian staff had improved by 47%. By every measurable standard, the acquisition was tracking toward extraordinary success. Yet beneath these quantifiable outcomes lay a deeper transformation that statistics couldn't fully capture: the cultural evolution from hierarchy to collaboration, from tradition to innovation, from authority-based leadership to merit-driven contribution. This was the change that would ultimately determine long-term success, well beyond the initial integration metrics. As I gathered my belongings to leave, my assistant delivered a small package that had arrived by courier. "This was just delivered. For you, Ms. Harrington. Security has cleared it." Inside the simple box was a familiar object, the flash drive James had originally given me containing my rejected business proposals. Attached was a handwritten note. "These ideas deserved better implementation than I could provide. The integrated company you've built represents their fullest expression. Thank you for showing what was possible when vision wasn't constrained by ego or tradition." The gesture carried a certain symmetry, a closing acknowledgement of the journey that had begun with dismissed ideas and concluded with their vindication through successful implementation. Whatever James's future held, he had at least recognized the value of what had once been rejected. Tomas was waiting with the car as I finally left the office, the city lights reflecting off glass buildings that housed countless corporate dramas similar to the one I had just navigated, power struggles and professional evolutions playing out behind imposing facades. "Home, Ms. Harrington?" he asked, holding the door. "Yes," I confirmed, settling into the back seat with unusual weariness. It's been a consequential day. As we drove through the evening traffic, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The anniversary dinner that had revealed James's betrayal had initiated a transformation far beyond anything I could have anticipated. Not just the end of a marriage, but the evolution of an entire business ecosystem. The husband who had brought his lover to our anniversary dinner had never imagined that his actions would catalyze not just personal separation, but professional reckoning. The company board of directors I had brought to that same restaurant a month ago had been instruments of accountability in a story that transcended individual relationships to address fundamental questions of business ethics and leadership principles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The SEC announcement would generate media scrutiny, the board would have detailed questions about integration metrics, and the final phases of cultural transformation would require continued attention. Yet the foundation had been established for sustainable success, built on transparency, innovation, and merit. As the car approached my building, I received a final message for the day: the official SEC press release scheduled for morning publication. The document outlined the regulatory findings, specified the penalties against James and 2 other executives, and acknowledged Luminary's exemplary cooperation and remediation efforts. The formal language captured the facts but couldn't convey the human story behind them, the personal betrayals and professional failures that had culminated in this regulatory action. James would face significant consequences for his decisions, as would those who had enabled the culture of concealment that characterized Meridian's previous leadership. Yet alongside these necessary accountability measures, something constructive had emerged from the integration process. Talented professionals like Sophia Chen had found opportunities to implement innovations long suppressed. Client relationships had been strengthened through transparent communication and enhanced security measures. Even James himself had reconnected with his genuine technical expertise after years of prioritizing position over purpose. Entering my apartment, I moved to the balcony that overlooked the city. The same view I had contemplated the night after confronting James and Veronica at our anniversary dinner. Then, my focus had been on personal resilience amid betrayal. Now, a year later, that painful moment had been transformed into the catalyst for professional evolution that extended far beyond my individual circumstances. The anniversary that had once symbolized the end of a marriage had become the beginning of a corporate transformation with implications for hundreds of employees, dozens of major clients, and an entire industry segment. The personal hurt had evolved into professional purpose that created value extending well beyond any individual's experience. Tomorrow would mark exactly 1 month since the acquisition had been finalized. A new anniversary commemorating not personal betrayal, but professional reinvention. The integration metrics told a compelling story of successful transformation, while the cultural evolution promised sustainable innovation for years to come. As I prepared for sleep, I reflected that the most meaningful junctures in both personal and professional life often appear first as endings rather than beginnings. The anniversary dinner that had revealed James's betrayal had seemed initially like the devastating conclusion of a chapter. Only with time and perspective had it revealed itself as the essential catalyst for something more significant, the liberation of potential previously constrained by circumstance. The husband who brought his lover to our anniversary dinner had inadvertently set in motion events that would transform not just his life and mine, but an entire corporate ecosystem. The company board of directors I brought to that same restaurant a year later had been merely the visible manifestation of a much deeper transformation, one that honored merit over position, innovation over tradition, and transparency over concealment. Some stories that begin with betrayal end with merely personal vindication. Others evolve into something more meaningful, the transformation of systems that affect many lives beyond those initially involved. What had started as one woman's humiliation at an anniversary dinner had culminated in the liberation of talent, the implementation of suppressed innovations, and the creation of a corporate culture where contribution was valued regardless of source. As sleep finally claimed me, I recognized that this journey had never been primarily about proving James wrong. It had been about building something right, a business approach that honored the very principles he had dismissed, an organizational culture that valued the innovations he had suppressed, a leadership model that prioritized merit over hierarchy. In that accomplishment lay satisfaction far deeper than any personal vindication could provide. The knowledge that betrayal had been transformed into opportunity not just for me, but for everyone touched by the resulting corporate evolution. The anniversary dinner that had revealed painful personal truth had ultimately catalyzed valuable professional transformation, proving that endings often contain within them the seeds of much more significant beginnings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.